of you that joined us for this. And agenda item number 1, we're going to have the updates from Dr. Mackey regarding the TQ2.
TQ2.
Say that real fast.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Siegler. So this first item is pretty quick, though it may lead to more conversation later. And then we'll get into have a presentation and discussion on the recovery plans. But the first thing you have is this teacher quantity and quality roundtable report. And so I know we just sent it to you, I think, on Monday. I don't expect you to have read it and digested it, but I want to point out just 2 pages. One is who all was on it and kind of the end result of what the recommendations are. I had those 2 pages marked, but I've lost my markers. Page 23. So if you go to page 23 with me, I want to show you who was on this roundtable and kind of how it was set up. So we discussed this briefly early on. At the end of the process where we had the teacher shortage task force, which was all local superintendents. And they brought recommendations, most of which we've either said it was just something so pie in the sky it couldn't be done, or those recommendations have been acted on. We came right behind that, and we had requests from some higher ed folks and legislators about looking at it from the higher ed viewpoint. So you'll see that this is a very higher ed heavy committee. We had Mr. Mark Dixon. Mark is with us somewhere. He's here with us. Jeff Langham, Jane Meyer, and Siobhan Cummings represented me on the committee, on this commission. Dr. Langham was there for pretty much all the meetings. I think Dr. Meyer and Ms. Cummings were in and out to provide resources. Dr. Strichick, who's with us now, originally was on there representing Gina Ross at Early Childhood, and then made the change over to Bonnie Sullivan. 2 people from AEA, I won't read all the names, but well, I guess I could. Amy Marlowe and Ashley McLean, Rick Wilson from class, Ryan Hollingsworth from SSA, Sally Smith from school boards. And so those were all the folks that were non-higher ed. And then I think everyone else was higher ed. So Dr. Robin McGill and Dr. Michael Walker-Jones from AIC. Nick Moore and Jay Keister from the governor's office, Representative Collins, Dr. Chris Cox from the community college system, 3 deans. 2 of them are not deans anymore, but Dr. Alethea Hampton from Alabama State, Dr. Andrea Kent from South Alabama, who's a provost now, I think, and then Dr. Ann McEwen at Samford. And then there were 3 people that work mostly in higher ed at SREB, and Stephen Pruitt, who is the director of SREB. So Stephen was not engaged in most of the meetings. I was in the last 2 meetings as they got really close on the final report, and we worked through some things. But essentially what they have proposed is a pilot program that would be a kind of a teacher leader project. So it proposes some differentiated pay and options so that on one end, looking at how we can bring teachers into the profession through kind of apprenticeship, looking at it differently. Can people maybe start earlier, like in junior college, doing things to get ready to be teachers if they want to? And then on the other end, where they really focused, though, was if a teacher's in the classroom and say he has his master's degree and he's been teaching for some time, and his next step up may be to become an assistant principal or to go to school and get a curriculum degree and try to move to the central office. How do we convince those people to stay in the classroom? And so a career pathway where they could do professional development and coursework, they could prove themselves as teacher leaders and earn significantly more money to stay in the classroom as a teacher leader. Ideally, those teacher leaders then would do things like they would have a lighter teaching load, and then they would take those extra hours. So that's one of the examples we had. Let's say in a school you normally have 7 periods and a teacher teaches 6 of those 7. Well, they might be back down to only teaching 4 periods, And then they'd still have a period to plan, and they would have those other 2 periods to mentor not young necessarily, but newer teachers along the way. And they would get a lesser teaching load and also earn more money. Now, this takes, it does take considerable investment from the legislature, obviously, and you'll see there's a budget page in here, and I also have marks in there, but I may have lost it. I think you have to go back the other direction. Okay, on page 13. So the proposed budget is about $3.3 million, but this is for, this would all be for outside consultants to come in and help us develop it. So in addition to that, we'd have to decide what the stipends look like and how the stipends would be paid. I will tell you this, there was some controversy. There's always controversy. So North Carolina is the first state that did this. No state has done it statewide. So if we did a statewide pilot, we would be the only state to ever do that. But there are districts that have done it all across the Southeast, with North Carolina starting. And I think there are 3 districts in North Carolina that have piloted something. And they essentially, what they do is take, say if you've got 7 first grade units, then they go back, everybody takes a few more kids, and they go to only 6 first grade teachers, and they use the money from that 7th teacher's salary to boost the lead teacher's salary. So you get, and we talked about that, and I just want to lay that out. We did not endorse that. We talked about it. Our concerns with that were that the lead teacher's already getting lesser of a teaching load. And so that means that now you have 5 teachers who are doing mostly the work that 7 teachers were doing so they're going to have, they may have 3 or 4 more students in each of their classrooms. Now you still get the teacher leader part. But here's how we got through that. When Representative Collins was very involved and went to every meeting, we said if we do this, we would rather go to the legislature, and we don't want to lose that 7th teacher. We just want that teacher to get a supplement on top of what she or he is already getting. But we don't want to have to say we're going to have 1 less teacher and use that person's salary to spread it out over other people. So I just want you to know that, because I don't know how much of you might have talked to some of the people and heard the discussion. But I mean, there were some, I use the term vigorous discussions over this, and great dialogue. And I think everybody understands that 2 things I think most everybody agreed to is, 1, this idea of having teacher leaders who can mentor newer teachers is good. And the idea of them being able to get paid more to stay in the classroom rather than feeling like they have to become a school administrator or something else to get more money later in their career. That's good. It's just hammering out the details. So where we are now is that this would take a legislative approval and an appropriation for a pilot. And Representative Collins has taken that she's having conversations with Mr. Toole and Senator Orr and all those folks to see what they might want to do. If we did a pilot, what we would be looking at is money in the FY22 budget. So that starts October 1 of this year. And there would be kind of a planning 9 months, and we would not have our first pilot group until the fall of 22. And that's what I want y'all to understand, is that we're looking at not even doing a pilot until the fall of 22, the 22-23 school year, which gets us time to get kind of beyond this pandemic, to have adequate planning time. And that would, of course, even that would mean the legislature have to appropriate something. Now, all this $3 million doesn't come in 1 year. You see, that's over 3 years. So there is about $1.2 million that has to come the first year. That probably is all that would have to come the first year, because if you think in the first year you're not paying any teacher stipends at all. It's just a planning year. And then the second year you would have that 1.2 plus whatever teacher stipends that were paid. And then the third year it would keep going. So And this is for a pilot in, I think we said 4 districts, but I'm not, there may be more than one. Up to 2.
Says 2.
Yeah, up to 2 in the low income, up to 2 more, so there's several things in there, so it could be 1, 2, 3, 4.
4.
Or it could be, you could do more, I guess, but it costs more to do more. So I don't know, I mean, I welcome your questions. I will tell you that I have about exhausted my knowledge of it, other than having read the report. But it was a really good committee that got deep into some of the problems of not recruiting people in. They really didn't spend a lot of time on the recruiting end. This was on how we keep people in the classroom from especially mid-career on. How do we keep them in the classroom and develop them as teachers? So that, I think that's pretty good, and if, with your permission, I'm gonna put Mark Dixon on the spot, because he went to all the meetings. Mark, is there more you wanna add? I mean, obviously, I'm trying to do, 12 months of meetings in 15 minutes, so.
No, I think you covered it. I think just, sorry, I don't know if y'all can hear beyond this, but,
Yeah, come up if you don't mind, just to make sure everybody else can hear. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I see you out there, so.
no, I think you covered it pretty effectively. The goal here is to expand the reach of our most effective teachers while also incentivizing them to stay in the classroom. And so that, we talked a lot about recruitment and getting more teachers into the classroom. There's been some work done on that, but we have a big hole in the bottom of the teacher bucket. And if we don't put stop the bottom and continue to fill up, then we're just going to continue just to burn through teachers. And right now, with everything the teachers are undergoing in the classroom, especially during COVID, trying to find ways to reward our most effective teachers while also providing additional support to all our teachers, I think is a great step in the right direction. So A+ is very excited about this pilot, and we hope to see it move forward.
And I think those discussions are going over there. Obviously, the report official came out in January, I think. We kind of worked the last, the pandemic got us too, because all the meetings had to go remote. And so they had wanted to get the final report out in November. We had some more dialogue to make sure everybody was good with it. So it came out way after your budget request, right before the legislature convenes. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to make sure to put it on the top of the agenda today, because if it comes back next month and you hear about a pilot and you'd like to say, where did that pilot come from? Well, it came from this committee, but the last time the board has really discussed this committee was the time when it was appointed, I think. And so, but they did great work, and we'll see where it goes. If the pilot goes forward, again, that would be in the 22-23 school year. But then if it went well, hopefully we'd build out really fast after that.
Excuse me. Before we go on to number 2, can we sort of do a voice check to make sure
Oh,
that
yeah.
so board members that are out there in cyber world, we need you to do a check-in. Like, I can see Dr. Reynolds' face, and I can see beautiful I'm sorry, you're not beautiful Dr. Reynolds, but beautiful Dr. Richardson. Would you just do a voice check so we can be sure that you can hear us and we can hear you, please? Dr. You go first.
Hello.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dr. Richardson. Mrs. Bell,
Yes, this is Stephanie Bell.
can you hear us all right?
Yes, I can hear you all, and I'm watching live streaming on the department website. A little delay, but I can hear you all.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Chestnut?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
All right, thank you kindly. And Dr. Reynolds?
I'm not beautiful, but I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't mean to be rude. but
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So are we
I've
ready
got a question.
for some questions? Yes.
A couple of things on recruiting. I know we talked about this, and I'm not sure who to look at here. So chime in if you need to. But I know we talked before in this room about out-of-state recruiting, and we know that many states right now, because of COVID, tax deductions or tax reductions in many states, you know, the teachers are not getting renewed. And so there are some states that have teachers that are looking for a job. Are we doing active out-of-state recruiting? And several years ago, we said that state-to-state reciprocity would be enforced, and that teachers who were credentialed in other states could easily come in.
Dr. Jane, would
Dr.
you mind
Meyer
moving
raised her
forward?
hand, so we'll let
Yeah.
her come up.
Come forward to our new microphones, please.
Any teacher who has a valid renewable certificate from another state can easily move to Alabama. There are very few restrictions on that. The problem is there's not really an oversupply of teachers in any state. That was made clear by SREB and other folks who have worked with us from outside Alabama. There's this idea that there's a mass of teachers wanting to move and come, but there really aren't many of them who are moving. But we do everything we can to facilitate reciprocity with teachers who have earned a credential in another state. And we have a recruitment office. Deborah Gaucher handles that for us. Teachers can apply from around the country, register their availability for employment, and we do everything we can to help them fill out the forms, keep their references current, and be available to Dr. Daria and other superintendents who are looking for teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And also the UAB Teach program. We know that that has been very successful in bringing in those students who have declared a major in math and science, and then asking them to consider a double major. And we graduate about 20 a year that then have a double major and that go then into teaching. Have we explored trying that at other universities? Because right now UAB is the only one.
It's a great program.
Yeah.
It is a great program. That's why I'd love to spread the love. You know, if it's good at one, why, you know, it'd be great to spread it at others. And I'm sure there are cost considerations to be
I think that's
considered,
the thing.
but I mean, I love pilots, don't get me wrong. And I would love to try things and collect data. But at the same time, when we have a program that's already proven to work, could we not explore expanding something that we know works, and especially in those high demand fields of math and science in high schools? And so that's just a thought perhaps we could pursue. And then last, I got the Alabama Department of Labor. You know, they published their 25 fastest growing career fields. And they've got their demand occupations, that sort of thing, and they do it by percentages and by job growth. And teaching was not on there, and that, you know, we know, right, that we need many more teachers, and that we have many that are retiring or leaving the profession every year. And so it surprised me a bit that the Labor Department didn't have it on there as one of the top 25 occupations with high growth in it. And I'm not sure, perhaps we just need to talk to our Labor Department and find out why that is. And then last, I'm gonna do one more push for that troops to teachers. I feel like we are a state with so many veterans, many that retired at a relatively young age, that are willing to pursue another career, but may need us to share them the options and what we possibly could do. And so that's on the recruitment side. And then the retention, just if we could get more information on the reasons why some of our teachers leave the profession, especially those that leave. I think this report said many leave in the first 3 years. And so what can we do, you know, what can we do to address that as quickly as possible? So I know I'm throwing out a lot of issues, but I thought I'd get them out all at once.
Those are good. I think, so AIC is working on, Dr. Meyer and Dr. Langham are working with AIC on that last one you asked, trying to figure out people who are currently teachers kind of what their plans are for retirement and what would keep them in the classroom. Is that right? Y'all are working with Dr. Purcell on that. They
Correct.
plan on getting it out this year.
A survey planning to go out by April, no later than May, before the close of the school year.
To get data, so we'll know why it is people do leave.
And can you
who might
report
be
that
doing
to us,
Yeah.
once it's done?
Oh,
Can we get
absolutely.
that
Yes,
report?
absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, and fortunately, AID's taken that leadership on that on. I will tell you the other troops to teachers we're kind of digging in on too. Again, that is it's been more difficult to get troops to become teachers than you would think. But we are kind of getting back into that. We spent some time since last month trying to figure out what is going on with that state office and the grant
And I thank you for
yeah,
that.
and I think
appreciate you digging into it. I just feel like it's an untapped resource.
It is. I think the biggest problem there is that the federal government is stepping away from troops to teachers, and they really de-emphasized it. And whereas so for instance, they used to have a state office in every state. Now they have regional offices, and ours is in New Orleans, I think. So they're still there, but they've indicated that they may begin to actually step down on it. Now, what that means is, and I appreciate you bringing it to us, Miss West brought it to us too, husband's in the military, about, that means we as a state are gonna have to pick up our own program probably to recruit people, because if they're gonna step away from it, it doesn't mean we just say, oh, well, we won't have any more retired military people becoming teachers. It's just how are we gonna pick that up as a state to make it a state program? So that's the discussion we're having right now. I think, we'll obviously continue to struggle with getting enough teachers in the classroom, but there are a lot of things going on. It's just they're here and here and here. And we've gotten, actually this week, have been brought into new conversations across the street at the legislature, where they're wanting to know what, in a very positive way, what can we do to support teachers staying in the class, coming in too, but staying in the classroom a long time. Because our problem is we have not enough coming in, but they're also starting to drop out really fast. And more and more getting to retirement age. And we're worried, that the pandemic's gonna really speed that up this summer. I'm hoping not. But that's one of the things we're talking about, is what can we do to try to entice people to stay longer? Particularly, obviously, in math and science, but special education, but all of our grades. And I'm gonna say one more, and I probably missed some there, but I think the reason, I don't wanna speak for the Department of Labor, is teaching is actually, in their mind, is a declining field. Because the student population, the youth population in the state keeps going down, and so actually the number of teacher units earned is lower now than it was 15 years ago. So when they do pure statistics, it looks like teaching's a declining field. For those of us on the inside, what we realize is there may be fewer students, but there will always be students. And
But it's the gap, you would think, between the demand and the supply that they would be measuring. But maybe not, and they have different measurements, but it just surprised me that it didn't make the list.
I think it's just that, only because you said, I wanna look at that, but I know when they look at like high growth, those are like those research jobs in biochemistry and all, because they may have had 10 jobs 10 years ago, and now they've got 300 jobs or 4,000 jobs. But we definitely, I've talked to Secretary Canfield multiple times that they have to help us on recruiting teachers, because if we don't have teachers, we won't have a workforce, period. That's great.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Yes, Miss Bell?
Yes, thank you. Dr. Mackey, one of the things that I think would be helpful, and I've mentioned this before, in the past, the board was more involved, and I'm talking about the board, not one or two board members appointed to serve on a committee. The board took the lead in all of these various areas that we are now discussing again, because we obviously will need to change with certain times, and the cycles are there for retirement and so forth. But the fact that the board has not been involved, and yet you have someone who's actually a consultant and is paid by the state to be a consultant who is speaking as a representative of the group. You know, that's fine. In the past, that has been the case, but we have actually had the board taking the lead on all of this, not just the department being involved, but the board. And it makes a big difference in being able to represent not only our constituents, but obviously looking at trends and understanding what needs to be done. It helps tremendously in the legislature as well. There have been, as you mentioned, legislators represented on these groups, but board members, and I'm emphasizing as a whole, not just one board member. That does not denote the board being represented or participating. We need to be involved. We need to take the lead as a board. One of the things you mentioned, again, the legislature, one of the problems with this legislation dealing with the textbooks and the textbook committee, the board is completely left out of it. It mentions the state superintendent making decisions independently without the board's intervention. I know there will be some recommended amendments to that legislation, but that's a prime example, again, of how the board has been not only undercut, but completely cut out of a process. This is extremely important, as Dr. McCarty has emphasized, with the fact that teachers are not included on one of the high demand lists, because it will be, and it is already, a need across this country. Other boards, and I, as you know, participate in meetings with other board members from many other states. And this is what we discuss at our table is the same as what is being discussed at the other tables across the country. Teachers are in high demand, and they will continue to be for the next 5 years until we have the supply is such that we actually can fill all of the slots necessary, especially, as you know, in the areas of math. The board needs to be involved. It doesn't need to be discussed after the fact. And in the future, I hope that this will be changing. I hope that we will be taking the lead as a board, again, not individually, but as a board. If we can bring in people who are consultants to be the speaker for the group, then certainly the board should be represented. We didn't hire these people. The legislature may have been responsible for that, or perhaps even a task force through the governor's office. The board needs to take the lead on these. And so these discussions would be preceding any kind of policy changes or recommendations or actions by the board, instead of a follow-up and a report. We need to be making these decisions, and we need to be participating as a board. I understand these are unique times, but it has to change. This is unlike it has been in the past.
Ms. Ziegler, Wayne Reynolds.
Yes, Dr. Reynolds, go ahead, please.
As a veteran, I would like to suggest that we engage with Admiral Davis, the Department of Veterans Affairs, because the Veterans Administration has an outreach program for education and other resources, which would certainly be very useful. In the area that I live in, with STEM and other things, we do engage with those people, and I think that statewide, we have veterans coming in and out of military service in all of our counties and all of our districts. And the Department of Veterans Affairs replicates many of the issues we've discussed today. And I don't know if we're in close contact or have liaisons with Admiral Davis, but we need to.
Yes, I talk to him every week, and I will talk to him about this and see if we might even get them to him or some of his staff to come over to a meeting.
And in light of what
That's a very good
Bill
point.
just said, I'm available. I work with Dr. Davis on a number of issues. So, in light of what Stephanie said and others, I would be willing to engage with you.
Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. Are there any other questions from our board members?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Chestnut.
I see it has noted that there will be two districts selected from low or mid income, as well as two districts from the high income. What is that process beyond income of the students?
Would be, Mark, you want to ask? Well, let me try it, and then I'll let Mr. Dixon answer if I get it wrong. It's a good chance of that. So this would be purely voluntary, Dr. Chestnut. We would put it out for superintendents and kind of on a first come, first served if they would be willing. We probably would target to some degree, because we've also talked about geographic representation, trying to make sure that we had, districts from different parts of the state. I will tell you, we've, of course, Vic Wilson with class and Sally Smith with school boards and Ryan Hollingsworth with SSA were on there. And their biggest concern, they've talked to some of their constituents. We have two superintendents with us in the room, but, and they've said basically they've got to see the money first. Like to sign up for the pilot, they've got to know that the legislature is behind it and for more than 1 year. Like they don't want to sign up for a pilot for 1 year and then the legislature the next year say, oh, we're going to move on to something else. So that's why you see a 3-year pilot. And we've, we've made it clear, I think the commission made it clear when Representative Collins was there that they felt like there had to be a 3-year commitment and a financial commitment over 3 years to entice school districts to apply. But when you look at that income, what we would be looking at are essentially, you just said it, high income as in wealthy school districts, mid-level school districts, and then some of our highest poverty school districts. And then we also want to look at, again, we want to look at other diversity issues. For instance, Birmingham is one of our most high poverty districts by students, but as a school system, they have a lot of money because the tax rate and the property is so expensive there. So we wouldn't want to say that they represented all of the poor students in the state. In your area of the state, if we looked over to Perry County, the student income for Birmingham and Perry County would be very similar, but the amount of resources the districts have to be very different. So we've talked about that also.
Thank you.
I have a question, Ms. Ziegler.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Richardson.
And I'm sorry, I was having problems on my laptop. I couldn't hear, so now I'm on my phone. Dr. Mackey, I wanted to know, right now we already have the mentoring program that many of our districts are taking a part of at this time. With the TQ2 program, will that impact the funding that we're already receiving as we're trying to maintain teachers through the mentoring?
Not any time in the short time, Dr. Richardson. So we talked about that too. Because this would be a pilot, we do not want it to interfere with the teacher mentoring program we have in place, which is, by the way, as you know, is in our ESSA plan. So we could not just do away with that. Now the thinking is that if the pilot goes well and if more districts wanted to sign up, that yes, eventually that they might be, one might subsume the other and they could kind of be brought together. But we've also talked about the challenges in that. So if I give an example, even when I was a school principal, I had 60 teachers, and every year I would probably have 10 to 12 new teachers, just from people moving, people retiring, new people coming in. Well, if I had only 3 people that chose this pathway to become lead teachers, I would not want those 3 having to mentor 12 new teachers. So it might be that we'd have to have a hybrid where we would have, this program and have additional kind of mid-career mentor teachers. Now, ideally, I would have at least 12 lead teachers in a population of 60. I might have 20 lead teachers in a population of 60. But we have discussed that, and I think the short answer, I've made it too long, but the short answer is we would not let this pilot interfere with that.
Okay.
What's ongoing.
Thank you.
May I interrupt one more time?
Mhm.
Miss Bell, we need your voice for just a moment so we can cue in to put your name up on the screen, please.
Yes, thank you.
Hang on,
Does that help?
keep talking for just a moment,
Okay.
please.
All right, thank you.
She's using her.
Thank you. I appreciate your doing this, Jackie. I've had people tell me, send text messages telling me that I was not on the screen, so I appreciate that.
Is that her?
Yeah.
We found you. Thank you kindly.
And thank you so much. I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. Ready for B? All right, moving
Yes.
on. If no other questions, we're moving on to the state recovery plan update, please. Dr. Mackey?
So I've got
Oh,
two
the
great
lady.
assistants over there. They'll come to the table and,
Dr. Ledwell is she's gonna hand
Come on.
out stuff and then help drive
Well,
the.
and then there's a microphone. Well, not that, but there's a seat here, and whoever wants the Mardi
there,
Gras
and
bead
then I
has to
can
sit over
move.
there.
Step back. So while they're handing things out, let me tell you, this is, of course,
Thank you.
they're doing a marvelous job. There's a lot going on to try to get recovery plans out there. We sent yesterday a memo to superintendents. Of course, you get copied on all those, so you saw the distribution of money. But we also told them in the memo that we would not actually distribute their new ESSER 2 funds until they complete the application, that we anticipated getting the application out March 1st. We wanted the board to see it first, even though you don't have to approve it, but we wanted you to see it. We'd love to have your input. We're still getting input from the field on it. And then we're still on the other end, probably, so superintendents listening, some of them are probably now they're gonna start emailing or something, but probably try to get them in around May 1st, which is early. Most states are doing June 1st or July 1st. So we realize May 1st is rushing them. But we also know that like most of the other states, when I talk to other state chiefs, are saying they want them back in by July 1st. But most of our schools are planning on starting around August 10th. And we're worried about if the plans are not into July 1st, we're starting school August 10th, then is there really time to do that? Now, some of them they're going to turn this around, they're going to have it in by March 12th, because they're going to immediately turn it around. But we are a little worried that if we leave the window too open, that some districts may not get them in if they don't get them in until the last minute, and that's June 30th. And then we find out that there's actually lots of issues. We have to work with them through their plan, that we could still be working on some of these plans, up till the start of August and school starting back. So right now we're looking at a March to May window, which would give them 2 months. And I can assure you, if we've got districts that can't get it done in 2 months, that's actually what we want to know, because we want Dr. Davis and Mr. Roller then to be working with that superintendent and those teams and other people here at the department to get them a plan. And that's why we're talking about an earlier timeline than any other state is talking about. So I just want you to be aware that's the thinking behind the timeline. As far as the actual work, these two, they're the masters. So I'm gonna just, with your permission, Ms. Ziegler, turn it over to them.
Before we do, if you'd be so kind, because we have two
Oh, yeah.
brand-new board members, would you introduce yourself so that they can put a face to a handsome, and a name, please? Yeah, I'm coming. No, you don't, it's one of those that they said, picks up.
Oh,
Way back
fabulous,
here.
sorry.
I'm learning.
Okay, thank you.
And
Yes,
please introduce.
I'm Elizabeth Davis, and I'm the Assistant State Superintendent for our Student Learning, and former superintendent, but I love his curriculum. And I also want to introduce Dr. Ledwell, who is the AMSTI Director, who is also part of this work and will be driving as we pull up a few things. And so I wanted to make sure I introduced Dr. Ledwell.
And Mr. Rose,
Yes.
thank you.
Good morning, Terry Roller, Assistant State Superintendent in what we're calling support services. So it's all things that support students and schools and administrators. Good morning.
and if I may, because I really appreciate you doing that, so both of them work as assistant superintendents under Dr. Boyd, who's of course the deputy over instruction, so he's got
Wave your
a
hand.
group,
Dr.
there's
Boyd.
some others back there, but it does really help to start putting these names with faces and exactly where they plug into the whole system, so, thank you.
And if you got to read the article this week, I get to say, that's my boss, that fabulous article about Dr. Boyd, so.
Yes.
Yes.
I had to say that, yes. First of all, let me say thank you. I know this is, I told Dr. Mackey, this is part of what I really, really enjoy because this is a robust plan. The two things that I heard over the past few months is the amount of money that, and as a former superintendent, trust me, I did not call and wait on the State Department much. But with the amount of money and with this impact of the pandemic, both you as state board members and legislators, my perception is that we are charged with developing something that not only helps the districts like the roadmap, but also helps guide them to fill the gaps. With the unfinished learning, whether it be academic, whether it be the wellness of students, adults, communities. So we have an opportunity in working with several other states, and they're in the same situation as we are with, the funding that is there and helping, but not overstepping, but also guiding, knowing what our state initiatives are, as well as what people have from the last year. They have great plans, but what they don't have as much of from our research is the needs assessment, because our needs assessments are typically tailored to our reading scores, our math scores, our standardized or formative assessments. They don't ask, and Mr. Roller and I sat around for about 5 hours going through what he's gonna share with you, but they don't ask about considering those lost 3,000 kindergartners or the kids that didn't come, or first grade, or what do we do? So you'll see, I think, what will help drive this plan is that component. And I do want to apologize to those those board members and others attending virtually, because while you have the PowerPoint, we literally were making changes last night on these draft documents that are nowhere near ready to be done. But that's why Dr. Ledwell is going to pull them up and show you, because the copy you have, I think we printed at 9:50 this morning, and it'll change before we leave tonight. So if you take it and share it, great, but it's not anywhere near done. So with that, Mr. Roller, can we start?
You got it all.
Okay, thanks. So in the PowerPoint, we wanted to make sure that we have school improvement plans, we had a continuity plan, we had a reopening roadmap. So we're continuing with the reopening, but we wanted to really hit on, and all of this, these are different states. And the nice thing about this is it was released July 2020. And so we are trying to pull in what is relevant for reopening, using funding and thinking with all of the funding pots they have, plus all of the challenges. And so looking at what we stand to face and the case for urgency, as Jessica Sanders says, and Dr. Mackey reminded me the other night, Elizabeth Davis would jump off the roof every day. So I live in urgency. But when I read this and thought about my two own kids, it kind of took me aback, when you think about your own children in the school system. So just the urgency that we know, of course, in learning gains. But then when you look on gaps, looking at what the gaps could be, and then B, looking at what the equity gap is. And equity doesn't mean what we have traditionally, only what we've thought of with equity. What we will see in a lot of these, the funding, they have more money than they've ever had. I've already called my CSFO from my former system and was like, oh, I could spend all this money. But so there's that equity, but the gaps, depending on what they look at, may be wider. And so that's what we really want to hit on.
If I may, for a second, we all have, all of our districts have needs. So you're familiar with the needs that you hear from your constituents, and they say, this is what we need to do. We all are dealing with very similar issues as a whole with the pandemic. But then there's some very detailed microscopic things that some new superintendents or some that have never dealt with them before need support on. So this is an attempt to give support on things that some have never seen, some that have been very successful in the past don't have a lot of experience in handling. And so we want to offer guidance and support for things that they may or may not have seen before, even though there are a lot that are common across the board for all school districts. Here are some things that are specific that we need to focus on to increase success, not because you don't know what you're doing, but it's just nice to have. When Dr. Mackey says chiefs, that's what they refer to as state superintendents across the state. They call them chiefs. And so when you talk to the chiefs in some of the most accomplished states, these are the things that we're doing. So we're collecting these resources across the board, and we're saying, here are the industry standards, here are the best practices, let us outline this for you. These are the things that you need to do. Now, legislators and the Department of Ed work hand in hand seamlessly to try to provide opportunities for young people. But right now, we are really working well together because everybody understands what's going on. And so when they say, you guys need to make sure that you have a plan in place because you can't come back and ask for more money because you have so much money coming in already. So we're making sure that we're addressing issues, supporting them, and outlining what we're supposed to do or what they're supposed to do so that we can be efficient and strategic in what we're purchasing and how we're supporting young people and their families between now, when we close out, what we do over the summer, and how we start up for next year. Dr. Davis?
And I think what Mr. Roller hit on is so important because we know that there are those out there that are gonna dig, and so you'll see at the end of this resources that aren't even finished that we're using and others. But when we finish this, they will have a manual, just like they had to complete their continuity plan, and that's what, where is that thing? Oh, that's what this pretty thing is that I have. Miss Anna Morris will help me as we finish, but, so they'll have a manual, and in this manual, these ed research briefs, which will have the links in there, because I know Dr. Daria will look at every one of these, but these are short briefs based on if you're with the pandemic specifically, what you need to do to help those that were homeless, immigrant families. This is my homework for this weekend, school practices to address student learning loss. And they give you easy strategies, and so we're trying to put those in there in a very condensed but specific format so they can look and say, yes, let's put this in our plan, because that's the other component, or there's always the other that they can tell us and tell us why. Because the third component that's not in this today are rubrics, and we're working hard on those rubrics that we have. I know the task force, literacy task force, has started and used several that they've developed, and Sandy and Sean and Kristen Dillard are working to get those, because there are some things out there that are already vetted, but there are some things that if they've got this innovative whatever that they want to spend their money on, great, then tell us what it is. So, but I wanted you to know that that's what the manual will be, to be able to give them those short snippets of, like this one talks about week-long acceleration academies. And while we hear that and we know that, what does that mean? And how much approximately should you think about budgeting for? So that's, we have lots of homework.
So if you look at the third point, it says from March to May 2021, we're going to support and provide technical assistance to the school districts. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we have web conferences where we're logged in for 4 hours and we're just fielding calls, but it might. You know, we may do that twice a month, or we may have time set up where we come out and do updates and support check-ins and take Q&A. But we're going to try to assemble the team here at the department. So one of the things that you hear a lot about during the COVID-19 modification to what we know as normal life is mental health. So what we would obviously do is we would pull in the prevention and support team, we'd pull in the counseling component, we'd have Marilyn Lewis and Shondalyn Elliott and Kay Warfield, who works directly with the mental health coordinators at all the LEAs. We have 102 of those, and they would bring in research-based best practices, industry standards, and say, here are some things that you need to consider as you're building your plan. So these people will be on standby along with the instructional team that Dr. Davis has already listed, but these people are on standby to provide technical assistance for the school districts as they're building the plan. Dr. Davis?
Yes, and so you'll see here on the preliminary timeline, that it says June 1st, and again, that is draft, and we're open to whatever as we hammer out, because the final will go out February 28th. So as you see, everything is in very, very rough draft form. So the next slide just shows you just some. Yes, ma'am. The next slide just shows you just some of the collaborative work that we are all doing with whether it's the chiefs or the deputies in other states, academic officers, just different components of this. What I also liked about the very last bullet is because it looks at the global impact and what's happened from, I laughed at Ms. Martin several months ago when she was researching Ebola, but that's what we've been talking about because it took 4 years to fill some of those gaps in different places. And so it's not a 1-year shift for some based on what we know from the global. But I think what's also critical about this plan is this is a perfect example, and this says strategies to avoid with student learning loss. And it says compressed content, grade retention, and enhanced RTI, response to intervention, show less evidence that they substantially shift learning outcomes for struggling students, and some have potential adverse long-term consequences. Now, as an educator, I would have jumped right into RTI with these kids that have been missing, or they come back, or they've been virtual, but those are the types of strategies we're going to point out. And if you look at page 4 of your manual, the first page 4, the footer messed up, we have 2 page 4, so the first page 4, it explains what additional time is, dedicated attention, and we take for granted sometimes that we know that everybody knows what these things are, and that I got all of that in this. They don't have time to go through all of this. So we're trying to be very succinct as we show examples. So when you get to the actual recovery plan, and again, the manual will hopefully drive them through working on the plan, like a manual does. It'll help them. They can flip to a page if they need a certain section. But we have revolutionized, and I don't even know if Dr. Mackey knows this, but we have taken that Word template that I love, and Dr. Ledwell and her magic, we use Louisiana's format in their Excel workbook, but they have so much stuff embedded. But what you have on the legal size paper, these are snapshots and pictures from the actual plan. So they will have an Excel workbook, and each tab, it'll be tabbed, and you'll see those in the manual, so that it adds things up for. I did none of this besides find what I liked, and Dr. Ledwell has worked hours, and we couldn't copy and paste either. So, but I wanted you to kind of know those are the components. The manual aligns to the plan, and that's what, as you see, C2 on the first piece, I could flip to C2 in my manual, and that's what Mr. Roller's going to explain in just a second. But we wanted you to know that we're not also straying from what we know our focus is as a state. We have our strategic plan, and we will have this in our manual in the understand portion. We have the 3 fundamental questions that Dr. Mackey shared last week with our superintendents at SSA, because we know that as a state, while we have these extraordinary gaps maybe from the pandemic, we also know that this is our focus regardless, prior to these gaps from the pandemic. And then we go a little deeper with these pillars. We have 3 pillars. Again, when you do lots of research, these are things that we are moving to anyway and have been moving to, but you'll see these 3 pillars in the actual plan and how the design will work. So those 3 pillars will work around in all that we're doing. And then I will not go deep into the next slide, but to make sure. Yes.
If you go back one, please.
Thank you, yes.
And so, she is so excited. She is on fire. Madam Chairman, School Board, if you look at high-quality professional development, and you think about what it is that we're doing and how we operate, all the work that we do is driven by the strategic plan. And so as we're building professional development opportunities for LEAs and educators, you know, we focus on high quality PD. So we can embed in our PD plans from now throughout the summer, work to support the building of the plan. So if there's an area where there's a deficiency that we see across the board in school districts, we can tailor sessions, whether they're virtual or face-to-face, wherever we are at that time due to COVID. We can develop our professional development opportunities in the summer to meet the needs of developing and designing and implementing and carrying out different components of the plan. Because some will be for summertime, and some will be right before school starts, some will be when school starts, some will be ongoing and additional hours outside of the traditional school day. So with the high quality PD, we can build and embed and design and support LEAs with the plan's construction along the way. Dr. Davis?
So this will be the only thing that I quote, get into the weeds about, and I won't stay in them long, but this we know regardless is so important, and it comes from the high reliability school and the work with Dr. Marzano, and the work that they support is actually Dr. John Hattie, and whether we like it or not, his meta-analyses tell us what works, what is guaranteed and viable curriculum, and these are the 6 things, the 6 areas that when we look at those high quality instructional materials, that high quality PD, one of the things that scope and sequence, what we know and what we learned that the literacy task force already knew, and is that scope and sequence is critical in teaching kids how to read. Well, that's very important, and that's in the book, and it also ties to these 252, I carry this around, these are the effect sizes that move student achievement. So all of our rubrics will be aligned to this to ask them, does it have a scope and sequence? And I use the words that Marzano uses, and then I used easy words for me to look at, but I just say this is part of our overall design, and while we won't be saying, please prove this, and this. There will be rubrics that have been built and are being built around this to help the school systems use these. So the next slide.
Dr. Davis?
Yes.
You go back one more? I know.
This is my slide.
Well, you gave me little bullets on there, right? So when you look at the last one for highly reliable schools, because we want to do what the best are doing across the country, right? So when you look at highly reliable schools, look at the end, it says practices to meet individual needs. Well, you're going to say, what does that mean, individual needs? Individual needs can be behavioral needs. Obviously, they can be instructional needs, gaps, learning loss. They could be mental health needs. They could be social and emotional needs. They could be student learning time needs. We're finding as we look at what's going on currently that, what is the number of hours an elementary school child should be online remotely? What's appropriate? What's the number of hours for a middle school kid to be online? What about a high school kid with high-level rigorous academic courses? Are you going to do 1 hour times 7 classes every day? Is that appropriate? Good luck, try that. So we're looking at best practices across the board to say, what is it that we're supposed to be doing to meet the individual needs? And all those needs change based on school district, based on school, and based on child. So we're going to say, here's some things that you need to think about. So if you go one more, Sandy, I'll do this and give it back to Dr. Davis. Here's an example of a need, mental health needs. Dr. Davis?
So we talk about the 3 pillars, and they're wrapped into these 2 slides. So when you go to the next slide, because we will have those components in there, these are the 4 components of their plan to understand, and that is the information that we give them to show the urgency, the different things, and also understand the options that are out there that are specific to the pandemic. And so that will be in the first part of the manual. You'll see some of it, but again, we're not done. The assess is the second part, and that's where I feel like we really are getting there. As a matter of fact, we're going to meet with Dr. Hull and his team next week, because what we also want them to assess is what are their needs in their middle grades to help expand, because what do we know about CTE and STEM, all of those things. So it's our job to have them think about those. So that's why you have 2 documents, and Mr. Roller has helped tremendously, because we just sat and talked, but you have C2, which is the first page of this assessment. But then you also have the Word document that has all of the assessment components. Because we, again, my sweet Sadie Ledwell is taking all of this in a lovely Word document and putting it so they will have multiple pages of this. But we wanted you to see the types of questions.
Okay.
And
So-
Terry can hit on this. I'll
Yes,
give you permission.
Madam Chair, yes, ma'am, thank you. Madam Chair, if you and the board would please refer to C2, and while you're looking at C2 and familiarizing yourself with that, I just want to share a couple things with you. There's some literature out there that talks about in California, 6,000 fewer kindergartners showed up. That can be drastic to this cohort. We feel it is drastic. You miss kindergarten, you can miss certain milestones that you should hit in math and in reading. Those that skip kindergarten, what are we gonna do with them? Will they be at a disadvantage in first grade? What does that mean for Alabama? We have the Literacy Act. That could be catastrophic. When you look at high-income families, how did they respond to this? Well, a lot of them found their own private school options or Mother's Day out or had family members that were in a place to where they could take care of those kids. What about the other students? What about the ones who chose to try to put kindergartners on screens? All right? Have you tried to take a device from one of your grandchildren or nieces or nephew or your own children that are young in age? Good luck with that. Look at the equity gap. What does that mean for those that were already having a hard time to get into pre-K or Head Start? You know, we have a very successful pre-K program going on in Alabama. What about the ones that didn't get the opportunity for that? What we know is that the majority of your brain development happens at what age? By what age? The very age we're talking about right now. And so what will that mean for us later? There was a recent study or some research done or some investigation by NPR, and they said enrollment down was 16% for kindergartners. What does that mean in Alabama? The impacts of early childhood learning come into focus in third grade for us. We're gonna have to make some very real decisions about the students that are affected by COVID right now. A study by the Annie E. Casey Foundation found that students who were not reading by third grade were found 4 times more likely to drop out of school. Wow. 4 times more likely. That's what we're talking about that we can't even see. We see it because our educators are dedicated and focused, and they've been thinking about this a long time. But what are we gonna do? How are we gonna help you? How are we gonna support you along the way? That's what this plan is for. Let me mention 2 pieces of legislation that's on the table right now. It is important that we talk about this because we mentioned the partnership and the working together of the legislature and the State Department of Ed. Right now, House Bill 208 is talking about start times for 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, okay? Because if you didn't have something in place that required you to come and you didn't come, that puts you in the group that we're gonna have to focus on. You got a Senate Bill 92 that's talking about mental health. Those are 2 things that we're focusing on. What are we gonna do for mental health of students? How are we gonna support them? And now what's even being put on the table is mental health of employees. Recently at our state superintendent's conference, we had a local superintendent say, what about employee assistance programs for staff that are completely exhausted by the tremendous workload that you have with working with students in class and working with students remotely, and then the ones that show up and then someone gets sick and they go home, or the ones that have been dealing with quarantine and isolation, because some kids come, as soon as they come back from their isolation, they get isolated again. You still have to deal with those, even if those families did not choose to go home themselves, they were part of the quarantine. So if you go and you look at sections.
Mr.
Yes?
Roller, isn't there, and maybe I'm ahead of the game or I misunderstood your first piece of legislation, is there not one about which I heard yesterday that for those kidlets that did not get the kindergarten and early childhood, that they must complete those requirements before they can be admitted to
Yes,
first
ma'am,
grade?
that's the
Is
one
that the one?
Yes, that's the one I
Okay,
mentioned.
so I heard about it a little bit in greater detail.
Yes. And we
So
can
they're
get you-
trying to fill that gap.
Yes, ma'am, we can get you a copy of that and we can get an update and a brief from Jessica Sanders too, if you'd like.
Right, and it's from the
No, Senate? No,
from the
House Bill,
House
that was
in-
House Bill 208.
208. that's
Mr.
right.
Roller, is it a 1-year bill? Is it just for COVID? Is it just for 1 year, or is it for the foreseeable future?
I think
It's
it's
to
foreseeable.
change the code.
Okay.
It's Pebblein Warren, she's filed that bill many years.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
But it is a little different this year. She's made some changes, and I know, I walked in on a conversation yesterday where she was asking, she called and asked Jessica for language and questions, and so they've been talking, I think, pretty much every day, but she filed it, she's amended it a couple of times, not officially, because it's not gone through the process, but probably when you see, the most recent, what actually comes to committee, it'll look a little different, but the, essentially, now what it says is that, students have, they're entitled to enroll in school, public school in Alabama at age 6. So long as they have completed kindergarten or have demonstrated through some sort of assessment chosen by the district that they are ready to move on, but they're ready for first grade. So if you know, that's all, the holdup for many years on that bill has been that private kindergartens have opposed it, and some parents just like to keep their children home to age 6. So it says either they've gone to kindergarten or they demonstrate on an assessment that they are ready for first grade, which seems to have really made it much easier on everybody to feel good about that. And then for kindergarten, it is still, they would enroll at 5 years of age. There's also been some states enroll kindergartners at 4 years of age, as long as they turn 5 by the end of the 5th month or something. And so that is still something they're working through right now. But I know there's a lot of concern about that. Dr. Strichick she can stand up and testify. We have some concerns about students starting at 4 years of age, and getting essentially halfway through the kindergarten year before they turn 5. So we really would like for them to start about at 5.
Would it be
September
effective
1st.
this fall?
So the way she's written it, it'll be effective this fall.
She's trying
Okay, do we have funding for teachers?
Just a minute, Miss Bell.
If this passes, wouldn't we need more funding for more
No,
kindergarten teachers?
No, because we only have, it's a very, very, very small group of students that do not go to
Okay.
kindergarten already. We would be looking at a matter of hundreds,
Okay,
a few hundreds,
well, that's a question.
spread
I've
across the
got.
whole
So,
state.
thank
It's a
you.
very small percentage, and of course, the 3,000 kindergartners that didn't show up this year, it would affect. So you asked about, because of the hold harmless that the government proposed, the legislature's working through, if they do that, then school districts will still get those kindergarten teachers next year, even though the students were not there in the count this year. But, one more point on it, it will affect those 3,000 students, because when they show up at 6 years old, what it says is either they go to kindergarten, if the bill passes now, it's not even out of House committee yet, they would either have to go to kindergarten at age 6 or demonstrate on an assessment that they were ready for first grade. So it's not saying that those 3,000 students would all have to go to kindergarten, but they would have to demonstrate they're ready for first grade.
Miss Bell, go ahead with your question, please.
Well, it's sort of a question and thing. I thought that actually passed out of the House Education Policy Committee yesterday. I would certainly like a clarification on that.
Mr. Dixon says that it did pass out of committee yesterday.
Okay, thank you. I thought that was correct. So actually, you're wrong about it passed out of the House Education Policy Committee. So thank you for clarifying that. Correcting it.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, Board, if you turn to section C2 that I ask you to peruse and
Which one?
familiarize yourselves.
The Word document.
On the Word doc. If you look at it, it has basic school demographic type of information at the top, and then it has recovery plan indicators, and then some clarifying details. And the purpose of this is not to assume that every team, every superintendent, instructional leader has all of this already in place. They know exactly how to handle it. They know how to maneuver it. You know, they've made mistakes this past school term. They're ready to go. They fixed it all because what we're finding that it is so much. It changes so quickly. You could have a school district where you just lose a feeder pattern and you have to go remote. Well, you're not going to make a district decision on just a feeder pattern when you look at a Jefferson County or something like that that's so spread out. And so what we're doing is, and it seems like it's a lot, but the way that it's designed by Dr. Davis and Sandy Ledwell is they're check boxes and then you add your content to it. So if you look down the first column, comparison of your student numbers, grade by grade, have you analyzed to see what your numbers look like? Significant discrepancy in numbers expected. Have you thought about your kindergartners and what they're doing? What about the ones that decided to go back to K? And what about the ones who want to go forward to grade 1? Other large population subgroups and gaps, have you thought about that? And then you can list those subgroups. Down in the last box there, total number of in-person days for students. Have you looked at that? Because there will be some students that had very few face-to-face days because of family circumstances, actually being sick, or those instances where students are in the isolation group over and over and over again. And so you take a really small school district and a family has 3 children that go across grade spans, elementary, middle, and high, and they had COVID, and they get on the bus, and it's, you know, you get them to school, how we get them to school, and now you have outbreaks in all 3 schools. And so you have populations of kids that are constantly out because of this that you couldn't plan for. But have you looked at that data of those groups and those situations that occurred? Days students had limited schedules or instructional time or access to a teacher because they took off days to clean. Have you looked at days without enough substitutes? Because what we started seeing different times of the year is that students would come in with symptoms. We would know because they're asymptomatic. Teachers get sick. They have to go home. Now teachers are covering classes and you're having to get subs, and then your subs run out. That's significant. Classes and courses where in-person and remote instruction were provided simultaneously. What kind of outcome did that have on the teacher that was doing the work? Have you looked at those teachers that had those circumstances, and how are you supporting them along the way? Dr. Davis?
Yeah, and so again, this is what we still are. A lot of these we've lived through as parents and spouses of educators, so they were, I want to say, easy to come up with to start, but as we go deeper, we also are trying to make sure that we don't have any gaps for them to consider. And so again, like Mr. Roller said, if this is my system and you see where we have LEA/school, we're not going to ask them to turn in one for every school at all, but they have that option depending on their size, because like he said, the middle school may shut down and the elementary school may stay open, and so these are things to help them assess before they start their plan, which is the next component. This is too, while she has it pulled up, it is a work in progress. So we are still filling those gaps and changing things. So please don't think by any nature that this is in stone. And then you look at C3, which begins the actual design, because we understand, we assess, we design. The good news is for this presentation that we haven't built anything for evaluate yet, because we're still trying to build the design, so we're almost done. But the design looks at those 3 pillars, but we spread them out. So for high quality instructional material, and you see the spreadsheet, what's nice about this spreadsheet is that it takes it by grade band, and the one that we gave you is ELA, math, and science. There are 2 reasons that social studies is not on here, but it can be added. There's another. One is we know that course of study committee just started meeting, just started that progress of looking at what those standards might be. But again, if there's something high quality out there, we will have a rubric for it. They can add it to this sheet. But we also know that these are the 3 tested areas. And while nobody likes to hear that, if you're a social studies teacher, that is the reality of our teachers. And if I'm trying to figure out if I don't have enough money, I need to do this first, possibly. So the nice thing on the right side is it adds up for you so we'll do ELA, for example. If I want to pay, and this is where we will not put it in the manual, but we will say over and over and over, Y'all wanted money to pay your teachers stipends for summer PD, you've got it. That's why sub and or stipend with parentheses, if not contracted, on contract, because you've got most of them between what's been given at the state level for ELA at the early grades level, but some of this that they're getting, they have that opportunity for science, course of study training this summer, plus the stipend. So it adds it up, and it also asks them to consider, what is your budgeting source? Is it local? Is it state? Because we know we will deal with those, the maintenance of effort. If it's ESSER 2, we have made a tab, the very last tab, we have built that, what was an application for ESSER 1. We have it in here, and we will pull from what Ms. Martin sends us. Oh, sorry, we have so many tabs. Oh, yeah. That we will plug in what federal programs needs so that they will mark those allowables, put that budget amount in here because it adds it up on different budget pages. You don't do that in a Word document, so thank goodness for Dr. Lidwell. So that is how we are covering all gamuts, because once we look at these sections for the design of high quality instructional materials, high quality professional development, we shift and let Mr. Roller and his team look at those unfinished learning, if it's mental health and wellness, all those things. Then we shift and shift that last page to federal programs and Mr. Craig, because that's what they need to sign off to then pull down their money. The other component that is in here is the facilities. And I think, yes, that's the other sheet that you got. It is a tab because we know with this funding that they can, if it improves and enhances this environment, and we know they've hired additional custodians, they're all types of things, but what you will see is other, because Dr. Vickers is like, will you please put class size reduction in that plan? And I send a text back, I said, I'm not putting anything in it. You're gonna tell us what you want. And so I think that will, with the guidance, because what they also need to think about are all these remediation type things, because all the research is telling us, of course, that building it in during the day, of course, before and after, but during the day has to happen, and it's going to take money to train the teachers, because if I put this in here that I'm going to do whatever, there's several different options in here. We're doing something with vacation academies, learning about it in a few weeks, but I also I'm going to have to put in there what high quality instructional material I'm using, which means teachers need training. And so when we get done with this, by the end of the month, we will have hopefully chiseled out all of those issues so that when we give them this workbook, they enter it, they use the manual to figure out what it is they need, they use the rubrics if they need them, and then we move forward and we process and get them their money, and hopefully they have a robust plan that will help them. That's our goal. Y'all know I'm not about compliance, so.
Okay. Well, that's very excellent.
Madam Chairman, that concludes our presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Are any board members out in cyber world have a question? We'll address you first.
Dr. Davis, excuse me, this is Dr. Richardson. Did you say you would be working on the academic piece? Because I think it's a great idea to have a recovery plan, but I was looking at under learning losses, the fact that we know there will be learning losses, perhaps how would that impact our young people as we go forward with the Literacy Act implementation?
Yes, ma'am, that will be very robust. That's in this folder. That will be built out over the weekend and early next week, because what I wanted to get the framework first so that we could see if this was going to work, and then we're all built, like Dr. Ledwell and several of the folks are working on the rubric components, and then I'm working on the remediation components. So yes, it will be much more robust with the manual.
Okay, thank you very much for y'all's hard work. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Dr. Chestnut, Ms. Bell, Dr. Reynolds? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
My question is just a very practical one. First of all, thank you so much. My head is swimming just a little bit. So So I have to take a step back and bring it back down, so that I can make sense of it. I'm picturing a superintendent in a small district in a rural area that this may feel really big, like it feels to me right now. So do you envision a plan for assistance for those superintendents? And then also, do you feel like this is gonna require, some support, maybe, how will we hold ourselves accountable to what these plans will suggest for our students? And I include myself in that as a board member. I include everyone in the department, and I include all the superintendents as well. Do you envision a quarterly accountability report, monthly accountability report, so that when we're through all of this in 2022 and 23, Alabama can look back and say, this is how we got from point A to point B. And hopefully other states will reap the benefits of your hard work and our hard work to hold ourselves accountable.
So the first question is, I put myself in the shoes of both Shelby County, where there's lots of CO folks,
Right.
where I work, and Eufaula, where I had one curriculum director who did K-12. And so this is a robust school improvement plan that is specific to these issues. And so we'll roll out for those that need it and want it first, and then we'll look at those gaps. But it's a leadership team process. And so we will kind of have a framework that I go back to what Randy Fuller taught me years ago with the CSI process. But it is a framework that a leadership team sits around the table and they work on after they do the needs assessment, and we'll show them this framework for those that, want it and need it. But then they also, and this is where I worked with Sandy last night, because I said, we've got to be specific on these tabs, because in Shelby County, I'm going to a room with my middle school folks, and we're going to work on high quality instruction for middle school. So I've got to know but in other districts, it's not that way. And so we know that format is critical to help and walk through and just give them that setup. Now, how we push, and we're still working on that. But the second component.
Before you go to 2, let me add to 1.
Yes.
Dr. Davis, please pardon me. So we have 102 mental health service coordinators out of 143. So there's another team person. They've already conducted a needs assessment for mental health and wellness related issues in the districts, as well as that's part of what counselors do. So now that's 3 team members. So a lot of these things have already occurred, and it's just as simple as checking in the document. It's a checkbox.
Okay.
So that's what those are. So you're
Right.
just checking that was your issue, and here's what you're doing to support it. And later, what we'd like to do is add something more robust, perhaps in a summer program, because a lot of the investigation out there now says you shouldn't shrink the content, do a quick assessment, throw them back in there, and just kill and drill for 5 weeks in the summer. You should maybe do some project-based learning. You should incorporate some physical activity or physical fitness. You should maybe do some of these other things and focus on developing the child for all of the things they lost, which just aren't instructional things.
Right.
Socialization, how do you get along? How do you be creative in COVID times, right? So include all of those things. So that's the justification and documentation that you're gonna do those special activities in the summer. So those things are going on. Your assessments are done in a lot of places. Your population is already identified. Again, this is sort of us reminding them, by the way, have you thought about this, Dr. Reynolds? I know you've been doing this a while, but have you thought about this? And you go, you know what? I forgot about that one section of the town where we lost all those students because we had storm damage and we had to relocate all of those students. So we've seen examples of these types of things happening. We just brought them all together in one document and said, let us remind you of these things, and here's your justification for spending your money, this one-time CARES money. Dr. Davis?
And the other thing that we've already talked about to put in the manual is we're going to have virtual office hours that we at a minimum 2 to 3 times a week that will be on each of the 3 pillars. So we'll have an overview where we say just general, whatever. But then if I want to join in, and I'm working on the high quality instructional materials, I'm working on the remediation, I'm working on the high quality PD, I have questions. So that is, I will say, we're going to go all in, because that's, if we don't help them and give them kind of a framework for those that, need it, and then we will, all this work is for nothing. The second part is that evaluation, and that I will tell you is what has given me a little bit of a panic attack, because this isn't we're looking at $900 million. Yeah. And so when we look at the second page 3 in your manual, it shows you those key components that have been researched that we're really going to look at. Because when we look at evaluation, what does that mean? Do we look at scores? So the reflection part of this, and this is what we're still hammering out, is how the plan is being managed and received by students. And what we also have talked about adding is adults, because if we don't measure if our adults are about to crash, then, so that we're building these components in their outcomes. How are the different groups of students progressing? So we still have to build this, and then quarterly, monthly, we haven't gotten that far yet. So that is notes. So thank you. And that's hopefully in part of the research that we'll find. I don't know the happy answer to that.
It's okay. I just want to put it out there because I
Yes.
know that'll be an important piece as we
Absolutely
have to report to those higher up.
But those two, the 2 things, the examples with the first question, will add to this manual. So I'm very glad you asked, because I take for granted that most folks know that we're there, we'll help, they call, email, we'll set up things, but letting them know ahead of time will be very helpful.
It will be. All right, well, thank you kindly. Are there any other questions?
I got one. I do. It'll be quick. CTE. Right, what are we doing to help our students who may have taken a career tech class and had to miss a lot because they got COVID, their teacher got COVID, whatever, and maybe some of the credentials that they plan to sit for require X number of hours, right? Or require, and so, but they're due to graduate this spring, but they don't have the hours. Will we consider allowing them to come in the summer and get those necessary hours, or take the credentials test? Or what can we do to address that need? Because I think it's a real need.
Thank you.
I'm Jimmy Hull, Assistant Superintendent for Career and Technical Education for the new board members. As far as the number of hours requirement, I'm not really aware of one where that's an issue, but there are module-based CRI attempts that have to be, and there's a certain amount of time it takes to complete those modules to get to the end. So we have to work with each testing agency or CRI representative from the different credentialings that go on within business and industry. They're all like almost separate, and so we will be setting up, local systems will be working to set up opportunities for students to come in. If they're on a like full virtual, for example, we have systems that are working to set up, on Monday, this group of kids would come in, on Tuesday, this group of kids would come in to be able to take it in person. Some of the issues, and it's the same issues we see with regular assessments, finding ways to do them virtually and it still be reliable can be problematic. And so some areas it's not an option, so they have to come take it in person. Some of the CRI testing, the teacher doesn't even get to put their hands on the test. A representative would come with the test that morning, they pass them out, the kids take it, the representative takes it, the teacher never even touches it. So they're all kind of individual situations, but the local systems are supposed to be working within their credentialing setup with the test providers to provide opportunities either during the school year, or if it needs to go over into summer, that can be done, because we're dependent on the test providers anyway. We don't really control the test. As far as the module-based type performances, those can still be done virtually. So even if the student is not able to come to school for a period of time due to a positive test, or the teacher is home due to a positive test, as long as they're well enough to continue to work, they should still be able to continue to work.
And so like the internships, it seems like some of the health sciences, They
Now
were
that-
expected
yeah.
to go into the field, and
It-
I don't know how all that's,
It's problematic because we're limited on where we can send students.
right.
And so, those are, it's a problem.
Maybe this
So,
summer, could they do
maybe,
internships?
But we're,
and
again, we're kind of at the
complete that
mercy
credential?
of a hospital or a pharmacy or wherever the kids may be going to work, and that's not just in health science. It would be in any kind of co-op and
Right,
internship.
right.
We're seeing those issues
Yeah.
pop up where we have to really work hard and look to find creative ways for students to be able to do those things. Most of those, there's not a CRI tied to the actual work experience. It's really more of a, coursework and a test, or modules and then a test. And so the work experience is just an added piece with more value for the student to be able to go out and say, I've proven this by passing this credential. Now I can go out into work and show you that I can actually do the work. So, but it's problematic to get the students out into some work spaces or work environments in some cases, but we're working through it the best that we can. But certainly, summer opportunities for work-based learning continue. That was a thing before COVID, so it can continue as we move forward.
I just like to support, especially
Ms.
those.
Ziegler, Wayne Reynolds would like to ask a question.
Oh, are you done?
I'm done.
Okay,
Thank you
Dr.
so
Reynolds,
much,
no, I think this is for you. Dr. Reynolds, go ahead.
Yes, I appreciate so many of the anecdotal references and the subjective questions. I think if a board member has some specific suggestions, we can suggest them. We've got a long agenda. I'd like us to move the agenda, please.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. I think at this time, we're finished with these components and we're gonna break for lunch. We'll
I
reconvene.
would ask that we discuss the, item 2 before we break for lunch.
That's gonna be a long one.
That's gonna be so long.
Well, I have some requests down here at the board that they want to go ahead and break for lunch before that point comes. So,
It's only 12:40, so.
what did he say?
He said it's only 12:40.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sitting in my
Well, I was
easy chair at
just, and we
home.
were just gonna do a 20-minute break. We're not doing the full 30 minutes, we're doing a 20-minute break and we'll come back at 1 o'clock.
It's your rule.
I'm ruling.